This is the worst combat robot I've ever made. So, a couple of weeks ago, I went down to Florida to visit my family. While I was down there, I wanted to see if there was any combat robotics events that were happening. So I looked online. To my amazement, there was actually one that was happening within the week. So I took it upon myself to try to create a combat robot with very few tools and only a week of time and no supplies. On day one and day two, pretty much what I spent the days going and doing was I just drove around the area looking for like flea markets and stuff to see what I can find. At my first flea market, I actually stumbled across like this vendor that was selling a bunch of random like engineering supplies and random motors, and I stumbled across this brushless motor. It was an Inrunner. It was 4200 kV. It wasn't very good for what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to make an active weapon robot. At the end, I found these two stores. One was Graves RC and the other was Skycraft Surplus. And those two stores became pretty much the backbone of whatever I was building. There was inevitably some things that were missing. I had to fill in the gaps with a couple of Amazon orders, and I had to borrow a 3D printer as well. Let's see what we've got here. We've got some generic tools, some Lexan sheets, brushless motor that I got lucky and found at a flea market, this random piece of material. These are gonna make for really good weapon, hopefully. We've got some M5 shoulder bolts and nuts, a 12mm bolt nut and a needle roller bearing for it, an LED light, a small belt, two 3-cell LiPo batteries, 850 milliamp hours, weapon ESC, this little power connector here. These are all the things I bought from stores. Here are all the things I had to end up buying from Amazon. Didn't have a controller on hand. Some wheels. These are really cheap. Hopefully they'll hold up. Wires, LiPo charger, screws, and heated inserts. Brushed ESC, brushed drive motors. I have the brushed motors wired up to the brushed ESC. Let's see if it works. That's the Inrunner, and these are the motors. All the electronics are done. I tried drilling into this, but the drill bits that I have cannot get through this hardened steel. So I'm gonna have to do something fancy with a hub that goes on the outside and maybe through this already made hole. And I also had to downsize my bolt to a 6mm bolt so it can go nicely through. And I purchased some of these bearings from an RC shop nearby. Also made this little pulley. So I have this timing belt that I don't really know the dimensions of. I do know it's 9mm. So pretty much what I did is I 3D printed this pulley already and a second pulley, and what I'm just going to do is measure the distance where they're pretty tight and run it backwards so I don't have to worry about the teeth. I've pretty much gotten to a point where I can start manufacturing stuff while I'm waiting for my 3D prints to complete. Since I have very limited tools, pretty much like a saw and a drill and all that, I printed out this little piece of paper, which is going to go on this piece of Lexan, and I'm just going to glue it on and go ahead and drill that. Alright, that took about 2 hours of drilling and cutting, and now I have these pieces of aluminum that will hold my weapon. I have these Lexan sheets. Since I did all these by hand, all the holes will end up being decently inaccurate. When I 3D print out of TPU, everything should be just fine. This 3D print came out pretty poorly. There was a lot of stringing, and competition is next morning. This was a 12-hour print. I won't have time to reprint this. But the biggest issue is that the holes are oversized. so my heat set inserts won't work. So alright, I've spent some time putting together everything after hot gluing the heated inserts in. This is what I have right now. Since I can't drill into the weapon, I'm pretty much just making a hub that goes around the weapon, and the screws are there to touch the metal. So on big collisions, it won't hopefully rip the hub. It is now 3 a.m. Competition's in about 5 hours, and this is what I have now. Some things that changed. I realized my TPU standoffs weren't strong enough, so I hastily cut and drilled some polycarbonate and just glued the end of my forks onto them since I didn't have time to print more forks. Some wheels, rubber bands on the wheels. This little rectangular prism is to keep the motor from pushing itself back, because I'm only using one weapon blade now because the brushless motor was having a lot of issues spinning this thing. Didn't have the torque to do so, and I spent the last like 5-6 hours just trying to get the weapon to be able to spin, and now it sort of does, but everything's really jank, and it drives decently and it spins decently. Let's just hope I can make it through a match. So it was competition day. I came to the venue pretty early and was just hanging around looking at other robots. My first fight was against this robot called Hammer of Thor. It was just a sort of a thwack bot that tries to spin on its axis. My first fight isn't very eventful. What happens is the motors I bought were ant weight drive motors, so they're pretty cheap. My pulley just kept having issues. After a first little scuffle, the pulley broke off and my weapon was no longer spinning. Since I had ant weight drive motors, I could barely control the robot. I ended up pinning him against the corner, but since I couldn't unpin myself, an unstick had to be called. It was a pretty uneventful match, but yeah, Hammer of Thor ended up winning, and then it was on to my next match. My second fight was against a 4-wheel drive beater bar called Proto X. I ended up losing nearly immediately, but I had fun. I thought it was an interesting little fight.
5 seconds, okay, here we go, everybody right there, you ready? Are you ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, each other up! Go! Get away from my voice! Look at me!
I would call my combat robot a success. It wasn't a good robot, it drove a little bit, and it spun up its weapon. Yeah.